The funny thing about Americans is that they all consider themselves temporarily embarrassed millionaires. It's Have I Got News for Your Ears, the show that breaks down the news of the week with the smartest guests in the world or whoever we could book. I'm your host, Michael Ian Black. Let's see what's in the news. So this is Have I Got News for Your Ears, the podcast based on the American version of the British version of the television show Have I Got News for You. We air on CNN. We air on Max the next day. The show is returning September 6th on CNN. And joining me on this, our very first episode of Have I Got News for Your Ears, it is my pleasure to welcome our show's producer, my longtime friend, and the nation's premier Mike White lookalike, Jim Biederman.
Wow.
Hi, Jim.
I haven't had a Mike White comment in a while.
You do look like Mike White.
Thank you very much. You know, later you in the show you interviewed Jimmy Mullville.
Yes, I do.
And you think I look like him as well.
Well, you're similarly pink-cheeked.
Yeah.
Jim, how did you get involved in Have I Got News for You?
It's a boring story, but basically I was living in Los Angeles and I got a phone call from some executive at Bravo who said, hey, we're going to send you a DVD of a show from England. And they said, well, we're flying to New York. We want you to meet the producers. So I met Jimmy Mullville, who is the creator of the show, one of the creators of the show. And we had a lovely lunch. And then he just said, okay, so you're the guy who's going to produce the show. I was like, okay. So we did it, and we did an awful pilot. I won't embarrass the names of the people who are very well known now who are on it. You were not one of them.
Okay, good.
It wasn't very good. But then we did it 3 years later for NBC proper, which you were on that. Greg Giraldo, Sam Cedar. And it worked. And it was going to go forward. And then for various reasons, it didn't at NBC. And then we did it again at TBS. Where I thought it worked even better. And each time it became a little more American, a little more loud. And the best pass I've ever gotten on any show I've ever done, which was, we loved it. It's a little newsy.
The show about the news, it's a little bit newsy.
Yeah, it's a little I was like, well, we weren't hiding it. It's in the title. But that was the fault of regime change.
Yeah,
and then it's kind of kicked around for a while, and Jimmy and I have always stayed in contact. And whenever, like when Trump won, we both emailed each other almost at the same time, like, if only Have I Got News was on the air. But we've gotten it. I'm beyond my wildest expectation. I'm very happy with it, and you're part of it, which is great. And now you're doing this podcast.
Yeah, and I have to give a lot of credit to you because that was a boring story. So what's going on in the news, Jim?
Well, it's the week of July 7th, 2025. I'm just going to gloss over that. It's the week of July 7th, 2025. And this is, any week in the Trump administration, a lot is going on. So last week, Donald Trump signed his first major piece of policy legislation into law, which he's called the Big, Beautiful Bill.
President Donald Trump's signature policy comes with big, painful cuts. The legislation would slash taxes, largely benefiting the wealthiest Americans. To pay for it, federal spending would be reduced, including on Medicaid, food stamps and student loans. And the non-partisan Congressional Budget Office estimates the bill would actually add an estimated $3 trillion to debt over a decade.
Partisan? Did you say partisan?
Partisan.
Partisan. It's funny, the framing of it. Supporters say it will kick off economic growth and it will lower the deficit. And then anybody who's actually read it or done the math says, no, it's going to depress GDP. It's going to kick people off their health care. it's going to make things harder for everybody except for a few very white men. And I think it's going to do real well by them. And I haven't checked yet, but I don't think I'm one of those white men.
I'm pretty sure you're not one of those white men.
Are you? You look like you could be one of those white men.
I wish I were. I'll be honest.
You have the look of one of those white men.
Well, because I'm a white man.
You know, pasty and shit.
Yeah. I think part of the reason why it sells is because Americans have deep down in their brain, well, who knows? What about when I become a billionaire? I want the tax credits too.
Well, there's that famous quote about Americans. I wish I remember who said it, but it's the funny thing about Americans is that they all consider themselves temporarily embarrassed millionaires, which is so true. Which is so true. Speaking as a millionaire, I can tell you that is true.
Millionaire on paper, right? You're not even.
No, it's in scratchers.
Oh,
it's potential millions in scratchers.
Sure. Well, I mean, we've heard for the past 5 days everyone else talk about how fantastic the bill is. Why don't we hear it from the horse's mouth?
Great.
I've never seen people so happy in our country because of that. Because so many different groups of people are being taken care of, the military and civilians of all types, jobs of all types.
Yeah, I mean, if you want any support for how happy it's making everybody, you need look no further than Melania, who looked thrilled. Absolutely thrilled.
Now, did I make this up? She's not living in the White House, right? Did I hear this correctly? She lives down in Mar-a-Lago.
I don't know where she lives. But I don't think it's with him. You don't want to. You cannot subject yourself to that many farts on a daily basis.
I do. I'm glad you went to flatulent rock because I was thinking, as you remember, we had Adam Kinzinger on our show last fall.
Republican congressman.
He famously said that he'd gotten close enough to smell that he smells like he has a butt odor, I think is what he said.
The delusion in this man's brain that this is a popular bill, that millions of people from every walk of life are celebrating the passage of this monstrosity. Like, where is he getting his information from?
I'll tell you where he's not getting it from. Mm-hmm. Harry Enton at CNN.
They don't think of it as one big beautiful bill. They think of it as one big bad bill. What are we talking about here? Well, let's take a look at the big beautiful bill, net favorable ratings. I got 5 different polls for you on the screen. And you don't have to be a mathematical genius to know that these are horrible numbers. Washington Post, minus 19 points. Pew Research Center, minus 20 points. Fox News, minus 21 points. Quinnipiac University, minus 26 points. And then KFF takes the cake at minus 29 points on the net favorable rating. Holy Toledo.
Harry Enton always sounds like he's calling a horse race.
I know.
Which I love. In like the 30s.
Yeah. It's Guys and Dolls.
He's down 19 by Pew. Down by 19 on Pew. Coming around the corner is Fox. He's down by 20 on Fox. Picking up the rear is CNN. Down by 24 on CNN. And here comes KFF. Down by 29. KFF will take the race.
I promised earlier that we would have a definition, the kind of breakdown of just exactly how bad the
numbers are.
Yeah. So here's Steve Ratner from MSNBC's Morning Joe.
And again, I would say in 50 years of watching economic policy, I have never seen a package that was so regressive, that did so much to take money from the poor, give it to the rich, and take it away from the poor. This is unprecedented in our history. It is the most amazing piece of social legislation in the wrong direction that we have ever seen.
Yeah. So, I mean, when he's talking about everybody loves this bill so much. And when I said, I don't know where he's getting his information, and then Ratner comes on and says, this is going to make rich people richer, I feel like now I understand where he's getting his information. He's getting his information from the rich dudes that he talks to. And they're saying, this is the greatest bill that has ever been signed.
Yeah. What do you make of Elon Musk coming out so forcefully against it? By the way, on the right side of it, mm-hmm. But also, I don't trust a thing he says as well. So
I that's my issue with the former Reich Marshal Elon Musk, it just seems like he's only in it for Elon Musk.
Right.
There's a line in what is that movie? It just came out. It's a Steve Carell. It's about a bunch of hedge fund managers where one of the characters says to Steve Carell, "Do you think other people are real?" And Steve Carell says, "Not all of them." And I literally think that's what's going on with Elon. I think in his mind, everybody else is an NPC, a non-playing character. And so whatever he does is just in service of this video game that he's playing called life. So he's, I guess, trying to balance, like, it's like he's playing Sim City and he's trying to figure out, well, how am I going to put the nuclear power generator over here if I've got to pay for, the people getting healthcare over here? Well, we just won't have people getting healthcare because they're not real people. It doesn't matter. I kind of think that's what he thinks. So for our first guest for Have I Got News for Your Ears, what better person than the creator of Have I Got News for You? He is, in his own right and in the eyes of his nation, a comedy legend. He's one of the most successful producers in British television history. Jimmy Mullville, welcome to Have I Got News for Your Ears.
Thank you, Michael. You made it sound as though I just died. By the way, just to correct it, I feel slightly embarrassed. I'm not the sole creator of this show. It was a team effort. And can I just tell you, I got in the way several times. Unfortunately, some of my ideas were not taken on board, and that's why the show is such a big hit.
And you have said it was the worst pilot you've ever done. Why is that?
The pilot in the UK was made, it was 1990, and the BBC, we just done a show called Whose Line Is It Anyway?
Right.
On Channel 4. And the BBC rang up and said, well, we liked Whose Line Is It Anyway? And maybe you could do something fun for us at the end of the week. And maybe something about the news. And there was a radio show called News Quiz. And Jeffrey Perkins and I, Jeffrey Perkins was a brilliant producer who sadly died a few years ago. And a very gifted guy. And he and I had worked on the radio and we knew this show. And we thought, that kind of show on television, let's try and do that. And what we did was we basically did a pilot, which was a radio show on television. And anyone out there who's a prospective TV producer, don't do that.
Well, in this nation, there are no radio shows unless you're listening to NPR, which by the time this podcast airs may no longer exist.
Yes, because all free speech is being expunged, isn't it, from the...
That's right.
From the public discourse in America. I'm wondering whether we're going to get on the air in the autumn or the fall, as you quaintly call it over there. My wife has decided that she said you should get a new passport without the American visa on it and just go in Esther and Global Entry because they might just spot you that you're doing this program and you'll end up in prison or something. And I mean,
I'm laughing because it rings true.
Oh, don't say that. But anyway, getting back to the pilot, we made this pilot, and like I said, it was not a good pilot for all kinds of reasons. But in those days, believe it or not, the BBC would book a pilot and a series at the same time. So the pilot was not an audition; it was a learning tool. Now, the pilot was so bad, I thought that Alan Yentob, the controller of BBC Two, if he could have done this, he would have backed out of it, but he didn't. God bless him. And Alan has just passed away. By the way, everybody I'm talking about on this podcast is dead. So
just don't mention my name. Just please don't mention my name.
If you and I make it through to the end of this podcast, we're doing really well. I think I'm kind of the incubus. Whatever I speak to recently just passes away. So he got me in the office. He said, Jimmy, I've seen the pilot. I said, I'm sorry to hear that. He said, do you know how to fix this? Yes. I lied. And I went back to the office and I said, well, we got a month to do it. The host at the time who did the show was a very good producer called John Lloyd. And he'd hosted the show and didn't enjoy doing it. And it clearly just didn't like the idea of hosting the show. And then we all joined in with him, joined the pilot. So he wasn't going to do the series. We didn't have anybody to host the series. And it was like 3 weeks to go. It's the classic showbiz anecdote, Michael. You know,
Yeah.
it's chaos, 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 chaos. We're on air and we're counting down the days. And someone says to me, what about that guy you worked with on radio 10 years ago, Angus Deaton? He looks like a newsreader, but boy, can he do a funny line. And so I contacted Angus, who was then straight man for Rowan Atkinson. He was going on tour with Rowan Atkinson. And we booked Angus. And after a series of auditions, and he was just brilliant. And it was one of those things where you think, like I watch you guys doing, I watch Roy and you and Amber and Jim and I, not that we're physical, but we almost hugged, but we just nodded at each other. When we saw our first show go out on CNN, you think, great, that's what you're looking for. It's the accident that happens. It's the three people who are going to grow into a kind of sitcom on air, chewing off about the news. And that's what happened. Angus was there. Paul Merton is the English guy who's a kind of street comedian. He pretends he's, left school when he was 16. But he's very kind of from a kind of working class background. And Ian Hislop isn't. Ian Hislop is Oxford educated and is, very well read. He'll insist on telling you, and is full of fantastic opinions because he edits a very iconic magazine, which is a bit like The Onion, called Private Eye, which is a very satirical magazine in England. So there was our team, and we launched it in 1990. And I have to say, a bit like our show on CNN that would, this podcast is attached to, it kind of hit its stride pretty quickly. And it was such a relief because when you make a show that bad, you think you're never going to work again. And suddenly it all came good. So, yeah. The end of Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom, where they put the Ark of the Covenant in a crate, and it's in a huge warehouse full of other crates.
That's where the pilot is?
Pilot is next to the Ark of the Covenant in that warehouse.
But, 5 years later, you're still doing it.
Yes.
How has the show changed over the years, or how has it stayed the same? And what do you attribute to the longevity of it? And how can we replicate it here? Because I need the work.
You're doing it. What's happening is you're doing it. And I think, it's the attention to detail. And it's also not resting on your laurels. It's looking at stuff that it's working, but could it be better? And, Jim and his team and Jim and I have conversations about them. We have conversations back at the UK. We have a meeting every now and again where we say the unsayable. We say, all right, what anyone can say what they don't like about making this show. It can be the coffee. It can be anything that's you don't like. Just put it in the room.
Nobody's ever asked me that question, by the way, because I have an answer.
Yeah. Okay. Well, we'll get to you later because I know you've got a list of things that you really are very unhappy with.
Yes.
I think one of the great things about this format is that its currency, the news, never stops coming. Right. It's always happening. And sometimes, sadly, when the news is bad, the show is good because the show gives that sense of relief that you've got a few smart people who are reducing very difficult, sometimes scary things to a size that 200 people can laugh at and the audience at home can join in. And that, I think, is one of the strengths of the show. Of course, it went through a cataclysmic event because 12 years in, and let's hope this doesn't happen, but 12 years in, our host, Angus Deaton, was outed by a tabloid newspaper for having a night in Manchester in the company of a call girl, as we call them, an escort, a lady of the night, and a bag of cocaine. Mm-hmm. And he went off to Italy, obviously, feeling terrible. I rang him and I said, look, Angus, I'm not judging you. I said, in fact, you're slightly more interesting to me. I thought you were a kind of boring guy from catering, but hey, the coke and the hookers. And I said, but you've got to come back and do the show on Thursday because actually we will kill you and you will rise again. But of course, I said, I can't tell you what Paul and Ian might do. Well, of course, as soon as Angus began to open his mouth, they said, before we go anywhere, buddy, tell us all about it. Share with the group. And Angus got very English and very tongue-tied. And Paul said, let's just leave it. And he pulled open his shirt and he had a T-shirt with the front page of the tabloid newspaper printed on it. And Ian then began to read bits out of the article. Like he said, he took me to places I'd never been to. And Paul said, how much were you paying her? And then Ian said he wasn't paying her anything. He's too mean. I mean, it was like a combination of a quiz show and a roast.
Fabulous.
Anyway, poor Angus, he got through it. But unfortunately, I looked him in the eye and I said, is that it? Are we done with this? He said, yeah. And then 6 months later, he rang me and said, they're going to do the same allegations. I said, what, the same allegations? He said, well, it's the same thing. I said, same behavior, different orifices. Is that what we're talking about? The same behavior, different bags of cocaine, different nipples. Fine, I get it.
Yeah.
So what happened then? The poor guy, and again, no judgment, because I don't care, but he lost his comic authority because, as you know, if you become the punchline, you can't deliver the punchline. We did a show straight after that, the second round of allegations, and thought, what are we going to do? Can he live through this? And then the show happened where we just saw him being killed live on air. Christina Hamilton, who was the wife of a disgraced Tory MP, a congressman in your lingo, and he'd been taking bribes, he'd been outed, and Angus refers to him as the disgraced Tory MP Neil Hamilton. And Christina Hamilton rounds on Angus and says to Angus, you're calling my husband disgraced after what you've done? Big round of applause, no comeback. Ian and Paul looking completely dumbfounded and baffled. The following day, we have to fire him. It's not a moral judgment. And I think Angus felt it was a moral judgment on it. It wasn't at all. I'd have him back in a shot to guest host it. I really would. But I think he's done with it. I completely understand. It was a very painful period for him, and I really felt sorry for him. But he'd lost his ability, and he was brilliant. He was a brilliant host. Because that week, everybody said, you're finished. You're not going to survive this. And then the idea came up that, SNL, they have a rotating host. Hey, let's try that. For the rest, we had 5 more shows to fill. Let's get really famous people to host the show. So the show had a bit of cool about it. So people were coming on and hosting it. And then the network looked at the ratings at the end of the series, and thank God, the audiences had stayed exactly the same. Good. So they figured, well, if it stayed the same, and now I couldn't get them to do a regular. If I said to them, can we have a regular host? They'd say, no. For 20 years now, you've done it with guest hosts. Keep it the same way. So it is strange, isn't it, when you have enforced change and you think it's a fatal blow. Something else happens, and suddenly it's a strength. It's suddenly a thing that identifies the show as being new.
I want to change topics because you mentioned the sort of dichotomy between your two captains, Ian and Paul, one sort of highbrow, one sort of lowbrow, and you sort of straddle both worlds. You're a working class kid from Liverpool who ended up going to Cambridge and studying the classics. But here's what I wanted to ask you, because I've never met anybody from your generation from Liverpool. So you must have been roughly 10 years or so, 15 years younger than the Beatles, which means they must have been incredibly popular at exactly the right time in your life to be from Liverpool. What was that like? What was Beetle Mania like in Liverpool?
Well, it was something else. I mean, I used to talk with a very strong Liverpool accent. And all my family are very Liverpool. And
wait, what's the difference between, for our American watchers, what's the difference? Can you do the difference between how you speak now versus how you would have spoken then?
I talk like this now because I wanted to be an actor at Cambridge and be in the university plays. And when I was auditioning, I was talking like that all the time, and no one could understand the word I was saying. They couldn't understand the word I was saying. And it was embarrassing a bit because they kept saying, what are you talking about? I can't understand a word this fucking guy's saying. This guy's talking fucking gibberish. Now actors, actually, some brilliant actors like Stephen Graham and James Nelson are some of our prime actors, are doing brilliant parts in full-throated, beautiful Liverpool accents. And it would be phony of me now to talk back in that way because over 40 years, it's been chipped away. I came from a generation where actors had to talk with a plum in their mouth. It's about class. In your country, there are other issues, which we can get onto later, but class is a big thing. The Beatles. Well, I was 10. I was 9 when they had their first hit. I love the Beatles. In fact, my sons are all in their 20s. They love the Beatles too. They, clearly their music will live on and on and on and on. And but being in Liverpool and being a football fan as well, which I am, an Everton fan in the 60s, and there are 2 teams, Liverpool and Everton. And there was a time when Liverpool played Everton as the two top teams, and I'm standing there watching them, and they're playing a Beatles song before the game, and I think I am in the center of the universe. That was the feeling I had when I was 9.
That's a great feeling.
Mm-hmm.
So you come from this working class background.
Yeah.
What I did too, by the way. I mean, I just come from a nothing town in New Jersey. I didn't know anybody in show business. There was no reason for me to think I could ever have a career in it. Where did you get the idea that might be something you'd like to do?
Well, you inspired me. You know something? I had a very bad stammer as a child. And I did a one-act school play dressed in a toga. Well, it was a Roman play, so it was appropriate costume. But I didn't stammer throughout the whole thing. I thought, I like this. I like not stammering. I was an only child, and I was adored but scrutinized. So I always felt like I was the center of attention. So in a way, being on stage in school plays became very attractive. But you're right. I didn't know how the hell to get into it. And then I got this place at Cambridge, and things began.
How did that happen?
Because I was a bright kid at school, but I was very disruptive. My school reports were good. I was an A student, but the comments were, Jimmy's the most disruptive boy in the class. Jimmy needs to shut up and listen. Jimmy, this is the one I remember most. Jimmy has an almost total inability to accept even the slightest piece of constructive criticism. It changed my life because I suddenly landed in this place with no map, Cambridge. And I met people who had what they call social capital. I met the kids who did have friends of theirs who were in show business, whose father did write Upstairs, Downstairs, and shit like that. But I was an angry little bastard as well. I was kind of getting frustrated. And then in the final term, there's a knock on the door, and this very well-spoken young guy, a student, said, I'm looking for Jimmy Mullville. And naturally, I thought, well, who wants to speak to him? Because I thought this could be the authorities. I don't know. Jimmy's got a Liverpool accent, and he wants to act at university. And his friend I'm with in Emmanuel College, David Hughes, it was my friend who came with me from Liverpool. David, he was like a brother to me, actually. He said he likes acting, and he's got a Liverpool accent, and I need somebody who could write right now because we've got to go into rehearsals. I said, that's me. So I did this play. It was a little one-act play, like a sketch show, really. And somebody in the audience called Charlie Shaughnessy, whose dad had written Upstairs, Downstairs, came backstage, and he was from Eton. Now, you're familiar with Eton College?
I am. Mm-hmm.
Eton College is the poshest school in the country. A lot of our prime ministers come from Eton, and some of them aren't morons, but a lot of them are. And he said, listen, I've just seen you. I thought it was great. I've been given, of course he has, the production next year in the first term as a fresher, the freshers production. And I'm going to produce it and direct it. Would you like to play Archie Rice in The Entertainer by John Osborne? And Archie Rice is never off stage. So I did that part. And then the president of Footlights, he was in the audience. It was a terrible play, but a good part. He said to me, do you want to be in Footlights? I didn't audition for any of these things because I'm
Will you tell people what Footlights is?
Footlights is a comedy club at the university called the Cambridge Footlights. And they have, had people go through their portals like John Cleese, Peter Cook, and more latterly, Stephen Fry and Hugh Laurie and Emma Thompson. And it's a great kind of breeding ground. You have to write sketches. You're putting on shows every 3 weeks. It kind of, you cut your teeth on the whole shebang of putting on shows and getting in front of an audience.
It's funny, though, that the accent that you worked so hard to eventually lose was the very thing that started your career.
Yeah.
So coming from these two worlds, the sort of upstairs, downstairs worlds that you have inhabited, and I don't think I know the answer to this. What are your politics? How have your politics changed? Have they not changed? Have they evolved over time? Has the show changed your politics in any way?
Well, what's happened? I mean, I became, I left Liverpool in 1974. I couldn't wait to leave. I just couldn't wait to leave. I wanted to see what the world looked like. And I kind of tried to reinvent myself, I suppose. If I only get into the serious part of the podcast, I tried to forget where I was from. And there was some issues with my family and stuff. But I go like a bullet from a gun for the next 15 years, and well, actually, nearly 20 years, I suppose. And then what happens to me is that I always say about my family is we come from a long line of alcoholics. The only time a member of my family refused a drink was when they misunderstood the question. So I developed that as well. And I brilliantly added cocaine into the mix, which is always a heady mix. And
were you Angus's dealer? Is that where he got the cocaine that got him fired from the show?
He would practice by sniffing cocaine off my nipples before he did it with the hook. I just loved it. I just thought I found what I need now to make myself feel like I should feel, and off I went. And within 6 years, I crashed and burned. And in 1988, I was in a rehab. I came out of rehab. And I stopped doing all that stuff, and then I thought I really need to connect with where I'm from, because that was the bit that was missing, was that I was kind of untethered. Mm-hmm. And I always say to people, a tree doesn't stick with its roots. A tree needs to grow as far away as possible from its roots and have a massive, beautiful canopy with lots of lovely flowers, but it needs to be attached to roots. You need to know where you come from. And I'd forgotten that in a big way. And I was talking to a guy called Bill Kenwright, who was the chairman of my local football team. You're an Everton fan, right? You support Everton. I said, yeah. And we're in London. And Liverpool is 200 miles away from London. And the excuse I'd given myself for not going home was it's too far. And in many ways, it was too far, but not in terms of miles. And so he said to me, meet me at Euston. I was such a people pleaser. I said, yeah, okay. So I met him at Euston Station, which is a railway station, and it took 2 hours to get to Liverpool. Enough time for me to have tea with my mum and then go and watch the game, get back on the train, and I was home by 8 o'clock. And I felt kind of ashamed that, it was that easy. So the following year, I went to find my uncle, who was the last surviving member of my dad's generation, a big Everton fan, in 1995. And I said, I'm going to get season tickets to go and watch the game next year. Do you want to come? So I did. I took him with me, and my stepfather came. My dad had died when I was 23. My stepfather arrived when I was 25, 26, and he's a really nice guy. So the three of us have been going to the game for 30 years. My stepfather died along the way, but my uncle and I still go to the game together. And it became a portal through which I walked back into the city and into my family. And now I am inextricably linked with this city, because I'm now up and down all the time. And my neighborhood of Walton there's Walton jails in there. It's near the docks, and it's quite a working class. It's always a working class neighborhood. It was my home, and I didn't think it was a deprived neighborhood. I would say now it is one of the most impoverished parts of the country, and unemployment's high, truancy at school. My school now that sent me to Cambridge sends very few kids to decent universities. My politics are ones of fury. I'm furious about what's happened to that neighborhood, but I'm doing what I can. I'm not going to, when I get into general politics, I'm not sure whether I believe any of it, but specific local politics like this, about getting into a neighborhood and thinking, what can I do to help this neighborhood? And what can I do for this city that I love? And that, don't forget, this city educated me. It gave me a free education. It paid me to go to university. It gave me money to help me go to college. That doesn't happen for any of those kids. Those kids who walk the streets that I walked 50 years ago are the same kids as I was. They don't have the roads to walk down that I walk down. And that makes me furious. So I'm happy that we do shows like Have I Got News for You in the US, because at least when you guys are getting angry about shit, I resonate with that. And it's impotent in many ways, but you do what you can. Someone said to me, a hero does what they can. Listen, you've got me on a soapbox here, Michael. Get me off this fucking soapbox.
Well, Jimmy Mullville, I can't think of a better note to end this interview on. Thank you so much. Thanks for being our first guest. Thanks for midwifing Have I Got News for You all those years ago. I know it's been a real treasure for the UK, and I hope we can only match, the slightest bit of it.
Listen, let me just say this. You have taken this format You and Roy and Amber, you've taken the show and you've turned it into what I always dreamed of it being, which is an American show. And, you know, I can't see any reason why you just don't go on forever with this, because the news never stops.
All right. Well, thank you so much for joining me on the first ever episode of Have I Got News for Your Ears. Thank you, of course, to our guest, Jimmy Mullville. Thank you to this week's co-host, Jim Biederman. I want to thank all of you for joining me and being a part of this first ever episode of Have I Got News for Your Ears. If you have any suggestions or comments, please leave them below. We will have some low-level assistant look at them and ignore them. Join us next week when our guest will be Andy Richter. And the week after, when our guest will be another middle-aged white guy. But until then, I am your host, Michael Ian Black. See you next week. Have I Got News for Your Ears releases new episodes every Wednesday, wherever you find your podcasts, and also maybe the places you don't. Each week, I will discuss the latest news and chat with great guests. And very soon, we have something very fun planned to include you, our HIGNFY fans. So please follow us and subscribe to our YouTube channel to find out how you might be able to be a guest here on Have I Got News for Your Ears.